Welcome to Pax Britannica. Slavery Throughout History with Patrick Wyman. Welcome back to Pax Britannica. I'm your host, Dr. Samuel Hume. Today, I'm so excited to speak with Dr. Patrick Wyman, host of the history podcasts The Fall of Rome and Tides of History, and author of The Verge. Patrick has just started a new podcast called Past Lives, and its first season is all about slavery throughout time. With the narrative of Pax now entering the period of intense British involvement in the Atlantic slave trade, I was so glad he agreed to come on to talk about Past Lives. Links to Patrick's work in the show notes. I hope you enjoy the interview. Patrick, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
So I've been wanting to have a chat with you for a long time because I think we first properly interacted years ago. I was previous lives. I was still doing a PhD. You were with Wandery. I reached out to you like, okay, how does being a public historian work in the modern world? And you came back with some really good advice, and I was like, this is a great guy. I'm gonna stay in touch with him. And then, the world collapsed into COVID and life changed. I want to start with a question I like to ask all my guests. When did you decide you wanted to become a historian? Do you remember when that was?
Yeah, no, I could actually tell you the exact moment. So when I was a kid, my dad taught history and English to middle schoolers. So our house always had history books in it, and we were always talking about history, and my dad was a history buff. And I kid you not when I say it, my dad read like a popular history book, some pop history title, for at least half an hour before bed every single night of his life. So the man read hundreds of books, and there were just books around and around and around. And so when I was a kid, because I was me, I was reading those books. I was especially into the American Civil War, and I developed a shockingly deep well of knowledge about the Civil War for an 8-year-old. And we went to the battlefield at Gettysburg, and I got into an argument with the park ranger on Cemetery Ridge.
Of course you did.
Yeah, he was, and I'm going to be honest with you. I was right. The park ranger was wrong about that one specific detail. That it was one minor thing. It was the most pedantic, 8-year-old thing to be on about. It was something about
remember what it was?
It was something about the position of the Confederate artillery. It's really embarrassing. I'm not proud of this. I'm not happy about it. I can only imagine how put out the tour guide was, because he was doing a great job. He was fantastic. Had the hat and everything. Loved the guy. But yeah, no, I gave him a hard time about that, and I was like, I could do this for a living. So by around the time I was 8, I think I pretty much knew. I dabbled in many other things between then. I thought I wanted to be a scientist. I thought I wanted to be a chemist. I did a lot of chemistry and physics when I was in high school, but I got to college first week. I took my first undergrad history class, and I'm like, yeah, this is pretty clearly what I want to do here. I probably should have had a lot more doubts about this career path than I actually did.
I just love that it all started with your very first... This is more of a comment than a question. Have you considered this? You may be actually incorrect there. So that's fantastic. As start as you meant to go on, I suppose.
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah. I can't imagine how insufferable that must have been for that guy. I feel... If you are that Gettysburg Park Ranger and you were there in 1993 on a summer day and some little just asshole, pardon my language, was giving you trouble, I offer my most sincere apologies for that in the present.
I'm sure they look back at it fondly, if they remember at all. They'll look at this and be like, oh, I knew he'd go places. I knew he'd become a history podcaster, right? Then in 1993.
Before podcasts existed, I knew this boy was bound for that.
He had an inkling. You are a history podcaster. And as I said in the introduction, you have a new show out called Past Lives. What is Past Lives? What are you trying to achieve with it? What is it? What's it for? What story is it telling?
So with Past Lives, what I am really trying to do is bring out the lived experiences of real people in the past. I want to try to get us in the present as close as we can to what fairly ordinary people were actually experiencing in their day-to-day lives the circumstances they saw around them, what worlds they inhabited. I want to try to bring that out. I really like using individuals as a lens on the larger processes of which they are a part. I think to the extent that I have a trademark as a popular historian, that's kind of it. It's using the individual as a lens on what's happening around them. And with past lives, I think I've just leaned into that in the most efficient and hopefully illuminating way possible. So what I've done is I've found real people from, I think we're probably going to end up covering at least 10,000 years, if not more. But I've broken it down by season. I've tried to find thematic links between individuals to kind of bind them together. So the first season is all about people who experienced slavery. We go all the way from ancient Assyria all the way up to the 20th century US to the very last survivor of the transatlantic slave trade. The second season is all about people whom we know through their bodily remains. So mummies, bones, people we can know in that way. The third season is going to be all about ordinary villains. So just kind of the regular bad people who have made the world a worse place over the past several thousand years. So we got like a slave ship captain and a Nazi Einsatzgruppen commander, like people like that. And the point of this is that when we tell stories about the past, the raw materials we use to build those stories matter. And if we want to tell a story that is a top-down view from the perspective of kings, popes, presidents, generals, whatever, we can do that. There's nothing wrong with that story. It's not like it's going to fundamentally mislead us as to what was going on in any given time or place, but it's not reflective of the experiences of the vast majority of people who were alive then. It's just not. I mean, because that's not the raw materials you're using. If you tell a story about World War II from the perspective of FDR and Churchill, it's going to look a lot different than it does from, the floor of a barracks in a concentration camp. It's going to look a lot different than it does from the sands on D-Day. Like whose frame of reference you pick, whose experiences you pick to be kind of the individual shards of glass or ceramic in your mosaic of the past, that matters. And I think that I wanted to put my money where my mouth was. Like I've talked a lot over the years about like how this is what we should be doing with history. And I'm like, well, if you actually believe that, then do it. So that's kind of where we're at.
Like as a long-time listener of Tides always seem to try and stay grounded. Like even things like your opening to like adverts was "Hello, my peasant friends" and things like that. I remember, and it was all you always try to keep it connected to the ordinary people. Even if, they're ordinary people who, the Fugger bankers who had to work with Austrian emperors and, they were important people, but they were ordinary. Has your approach changed with past lives versus how you approach Tides of History? Or is it more of the same thing? It's just you've, shifted in a slight direction?
I would say there's more squeezing. When we are dealing with real people in the past, real ordinary people, very rarely do we have as much information about them as we would want. And so what we are having to do, if we want to talk about these people, is fill in a lot of blanks and really squeeze the material that we have for the maximum amount that it can tell us. Every word becomes, in a source text, becomes meaningful. So I would say Past Lives is much more focused than Tides was in that regard. Like it really, really, really keeps the focus on those individuals, and the sociological storytelling is much more built into the DNA of the show. They are inseparable. And so which is what I've always wanted to do. That is the way I have always wanted to make these things. And now I finally feel like I actually have the skills and the amount of background knowledge necessary in all of these different times and places to be able to do that effectively. Does that make sense? Like I was not fully confident in my ability to do that before now.
Is that because you've been in the public history space for, 8-9 years now? When did you start with The Fall of Rome?
Oh God, yeah, 9 years. 9 years. Yeah.
So is that from, almost a decade of experience, you're now at the point where you're like, okay, let's do this?
Yeah, and I have I've done the homework. One of the things that I know this, when you do a PhD, you just read and you read and you read and you read and you read, because everything you could possibly want to know about, somebody has talked about it before. Somebody has written about it before. And if you're going to do the job correctly, you need to know what they've said. And so that means that getting to know any new topic just involves a ton of reading. And that's what I do week to week, day to day. It is reading stuff. It's finding the right things to read. That's the other trick that you learn from a PhD, is not just the reading part of it. It's, what do I need to read? What are the things that I should be reading? How do I parse this esoteric academic debate? How do I get my bearings in a new field? And I have now done that for long enough to be able to slip easily into that skin when I need to. So even if I don't have a full list of references for a time and a place I want to go on past lives, which I usually do now at this point, I usually have done what amounts to an annotated bibliography of a particular field. And so I can just go back to that. I know what I need to read. I'll go through and I'll update it with stuff that's been published since I did that research guide. And then I have everything I need to be able to fill in the world around these people. And I can just dive into the primary sources, such as they are, and give them a full accounting. So it is, I would say in large part that, like, it's taken me this long to get the background knowledge that I need to be able to produce a show like this weekly, where I'm going to jump from Syria to Athens to Rome to the Muslim Middle Ages to background information, the references ready to go, to be able to just hop in and be like, okay, I need to remind myself, what was Abu Bakr up to in 642? Like, I have the sources now to be able to go and say, okay, I can contextualize that and I can understand what was happening around this person such that it actually illuminates their experiences.
I'm just having flashbacks to when I made The History of Witchcraft, which was a topical podcast. I did jump from period to period, topic to topic. And yeah, so I'd go from the trial of the Knights Templar to early modern witch trials in southern Germany. I couldn't get episodes out as quickly as I might like because, you need to do a lot of research. Like you said, you've been working in public history and particularly history podcasting for a while now. Have you seen it change over those 9 years?
Oh my God.
Nice, easy question.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah. So I think the biggest changes are in kind of the structure of the podcasting industry. And that when I got into this in 2016, I really hit it at an auspicious moment. It was at a time when the audiences for podcasts were growing dramatically, but before the big podcast companies that you see now had really cornered the market on audience. So it was possible in 2016, when I launched Fall of Rome, to put out a brand new independent show with absolutely no support. And if you kind of hit it right, that could be a real thing. I think now it is much, much, much harder to do that. It's much harder to cut through the noise. It's much harder to get access to the kinds of platforms that are going to disseminate your work widely. I think it was a lot easier to do that in the 2016 iteration of the internet. And what you've seen is the pot of money in podcast advertising that everybody is relying on to, fund their shows. That pot of money has grown since 2016 as audiences have grown, but who controls that pot of money and where it goes has become dramatically more restricted. So it used to be that there was a ton of money out there for independent podcasters with audiences. And now there just really isn't, because these big companies have cornered the market on ad dollars. And by and large, those ad dollars are going to go to their original shows that they desperately need to make the money back on. Because you think about the Kelsey brothers, who were with Wondery, now they're going to be with Amazon. Nothing but respect for them as audio professionals. Like, they take their show seriously. They work hard at it. They do good interviews. They have demonstrably put in the work to be good at what they do. But we're talking about tens of millions of dollars in advertising running through that show. And if you're Amazon, that's your number one priority, is making sure that show is paying for itself, that those lots of zeros are going to add up in your books. You don't really care whether you're small shows that are, doing a few $100,000 in business a year, small for Amazon, whether those are, it's not in the same stratosphere. It just doesn't even register. And same with Spotify and Joe Rogan. Every one of these big podcast companies has tried to nail down a flagship show, and that's fundamentally warped the economics of the podcasting industry. And right now we are about to enter, I think, a new kind of renaissance as subscription content becomes more normalized. That the idea that you can make a show and if you have 1,000 people who are willing to pay you for it, that's a viable career. That is a game changer in this space, because it's what's going to allow you to make a wide distribution show that nevertheless pays for itself and supports itself without having to rely on kind of the vagaries of the ad market. So that's really what we've tried to do with Past Lives. That's kind of the bet that we're making from a business perspective, is that we've reached the point now where platforms like Patreon and Substack are used enough, that they have enough of a user base, there are enough people on them, that if we make a show that supports itself through those platforms, we'll make enough to not just survive, but hopefully thrive.
And that those platforms have themselves, they've embraced podcasting. I know Patreon, I've not really used Substack, but Patreon certainly for a long time was kind of like, you do a podcast, have a Patreon, but it's separate, whereas Patreon the last couple of years has really tried to embrace podcasters. I can only speak for myself. I have, as you know, I have signed up as a member of the Past Lives Patreon.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's much appreciated. When I saw the notification come through that you had signed up, I smiled. I was like, oh, I feel so good. The economics right now, if you can afford to spend not a lot of money, but a little bit of money, and I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I could afford to spend a little bit of money, like Tides has done really well over the years. I've had books, like I've been able to save enough to have a little bit of capital to put toward this project. And a little bit goes a long way in podcasting. If you know the right people to work with, the rates to hire great people in audio and in history also are shockingly reasonable. And again, it's not like you don't have to have an office, you don't have to have a recording studio, you have to have equipment, but like that's not that expensive. And chances are good that you can find the right people to work with to make good stuff at a reasonable price point. And because of the nature of the industry, like you're just pumping out digital files like it scales, it's not like your costs are going to rise commensurately as your audience does. So there is an actual like business case for making this kind of content at this price point. And I mean, what we haven't talked about is like, I actually care about making good stuff. I care about making with good people. I care very deeply about making a quality product. And so like, this is not an argument in favor of everybody trying to go out and get rich quick making history content. It's that I really fundamentally believe, and I'm putting my money where my mouth is, that there is a path to not just making good content, but making it profitably. Like I got to pay my people, like not to sound like a small business owner or like a member of the petty bourgeois here, but like I do have to pay them, and I need to get paid in turn to be able to do that. And like, I care very deeply about making sure that these people are rewarded for the hard work that they're doing and doing so well. And so like, yeah, I do have to worry about that and care about it maybe in a way that I didn't used to with Tides.
When I reached out in your response, you said that that Past Lives is your favorite thing you've ever made, which I think is like, not to make you sound old, but you've been at this for a while.
I have.
And so that's really cool. That's great to hear that this is something you've voted to and you're enthusiastic about.
Yeah, I mean, this ties back into the perceptive question that you asked about how podcasting has changed. But like, I got my start in digital media in the wake of the Great Recession. Right? Like I started writing on the internet, making podcasts on the internet in 2011, 2012, 2013. And the core lesson that I took from those early experiences was that none of this stuff is going to last for very long. That whatever you're doing, whatever you're making, no matter how good it is, no matter how exciting it is, somebody's going to come in and buy it and ruin the company. Somebody's going to cancel you because you don't fit on a line item. There is some company is going to hire some guy who comes in with just terrible ideas about how to make this profitable. And you're going to that it's your job as a person making stuff to have to deal with those currents, that those are not separate from the work that I do, that's just like, it's the water that we're swimming in. We're all fish and we're swimming in these god awful currents of late capitalism here. And that to have a career in this industry means having to navigate that and figure it out. And so my response has been to always have contingency plans, to always be thinking about what the next project I want to do is and how I would monetize it and how I would just what can I do to kind of proof myself against this incredibly unstable environment that we're in. And so, I started working on the concept for Past Lives 2 years ago because I knew as soon as Wondery got purchased that at some point Wondery was going to go kaput. You don't work for a company like Amazon or even indirectly and not consider the possibility that your entire department is not going to exist. If you're not considering that, honestly, you're doing yourself a disservice because that's how they operate and you don't need to be sentimental about it. They sure as hell aren't. So, you always have to have in the back of your head, what is the next thing? What is my next opportunity? What's the next angle? And so I had that out, the kind of the skeleton of what I wanted to do with Past Lives 2 years ago. And then when it became clear that the situation was going to change once again, all I had to do was kind of dust it off and turn it into an actual plan. It wasn't exactly easy to get Past Lives fired up as quickly as we did it. We from realizing that we needed to get it out when we did, it was about 2 months to get a whole show into production and moving. So we had to move fast with it, but we couldn't have done that if I hadn't done the work over the past couple of years to know, this is a concept for a show that could work. Here are the kinds of characters that I would want to talk about. Here are the people that I would want to work with. Here is how I would want to distribute it. I had already done that background work. And then when it came time to get the projects going, it was really just a matter of kind of having the conversations with people, getting everybody on board, finding the right folks, and then just kind of moving on with it. If there is any piece of advice I could give to people working in this space, it's just always have a backup plan. Always know that no matter how solid it seems at any given moment, that things are going to change and they're going to change rather quickly. And you've kind of got to be agile enough to deal with that. It sucks. It's unfortunate. It's not the environment that any of us would want or prefer, but it is what it is. And that's kind of the best way that I've found to navigate it.
Well, let's go back to that backup plan, Past Lives, which, like I said, you're very fond of and you're enthusiastically making. Obviously, the central focus of Past Lives is looking at the people who really don't make up much of the historical record. There's a name here, a reference to them there that you can kind of piece together, and from that you create these narratives, which, as of recording, there's a couple of episodes out. They're both very good, I have to say.
Thank you.
But that naturally poses a practical problem that you don't have when you're dealing with kings and emperors, is that there's very little source space. How do you get around that lack of information?
So we're really used to biographical storytelling, right? We're used to, you start at the beginning of a person's life and then you tell their life story from beginning to end, and you are talking about the world as it impinges on that person's life, as it shapes that person's life, as they shape the world around them. But your point of reference is fundamentally the beginning to end life story of a person. When you are not dealing with that kind of wealth of information that allows you to actually lay out someone's life story, you have to take a different approach. And what I do is take what we know, whatever those scraps of information are, and try to embed them in the world and use the world to explain those scraps. And when you do that, quite often you end up with enough information to actually tell a person's life story. So the first person that we talk about on Past Lives is a woman named Nanaya Ila'i. And she was an Elamite. She was from what's now southwestern Iran, belonged to the Elamite people. They were enemies of the Assyrians. The Assyrians came through, absolutely leveled about half of Elam, and took thousands of people back to Assyria as captives. And one of them was Nanaya Ila'i. We only know that she existed from this one text. It is a clay tablet that was found in the ruins of Ashur. The city of Ashur was itself destroyed by the Babylonians and the Medes a few decades after this. So if this poor woman survived another 30 years, she had to live through another sack of a city. Just god awful. But we only have this one document. It's a sale document, and it tells us what name they gave her. It tells us how much money they sold her for. It tells us who the buyers were and who the sellers were. And it tells us that she was an Elamite. And that allows us to figure out which campaign it was that she was probably captured on. We can fill in the details of that campaign. We have textual sources that tell us what the Assyrians were up to. Pretty horrifying stuff. And then we actually know a fair bit about slavery in the Assyrian Empire. And we know a fair bit about the physical geography of the city of Ashur. We know a fair bit about the Elamites. So when we have those details in mind, you can start to see the outlines of a person. They're never as fully three-dimensional as you want them to be. There are always questions that you can't answer. I don't know how Nanaye Ila'i felt about being enslaved and dragged to Ashur. I can guess it probably wasn't great. I can guess that was probably not something that she wanted to have happen to her. But we can say, like, this is what slavery in Assyria looked like most of the time. We can say it's unlikely that she ever would have been freed because there are no manumission documents from the Assyrian Empire, in contrast with the Babylonians, who are just south where there are tons of them. So the Assyrians generally did not manumit slaves. Also, though, they generally did not separate parents from children. Not a hard and fast rule, but Nanaye Ila'i went with her daughter, who was young enough to not be able to be separated from her, and the chances are good that she and Nanaye Ila'i weren't separated. So these are little details that you can pick out. They're little aspects of things that you can read into the really, really thin record that you have, just to try and build up a picture around her. We don't know if Nanaye Ila'i would have been typical of those things or not, but we can say this is what the norm looked like in her place and time. This is what she probably would have seen around her, and we can make some reasonable inferences. So it's hard as a former academic to make those inferences. It's hard to step beyond the bounds of your evidence and really say, like, I think this, I think that. But you've got to do that. And at the end of the day, how I feel about it and kind of justify it to myself is that all of history is making inferences. All of history is making jumps between the little individual dots of evidence that you have. We may be more or less aware of that. We may couch it in different terms, but it is nevertheless a leap of interpretation. And I don't think that what I'm doing at a fundamental level is really any different than that.
And maybe it's a bit too early to know this yet, but what's the reception been like? I am guessing positive. I mean, that's certainly how I would judge it.
Aside from one person who I think I angered in a different context who left a nasty review, it has been uniformly positive. I think I made somebody angry probably on the internet somewhere else and they came and left a bad review. But aside from that guy, and I'm quite willing to discount his opinion on past lives because I don't think he's listened to it, it's been really, really positive. It's definitely different than other history shows that are out there. The perspective is different. The subject matter is different, but that's good from my perspective. That's what I want. I didn't want to do the kind of thing that I've been doing for the past decade because I'm tired of it. I'm not bored, but I don't want to write another 45-minute episode on kind of the development of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Like, that was fun to do. I'm glad that I did it. I'm glad that I have that background now and could tell you everything you want to know about the emergence of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. But I don't want to write that episode again. I want to write about people. People are what I care about. I love people. I love people watching. I love talking to Uber drivers. I love like all of that. That is, like, I love going to a barbecue and talking to somebody that I would never otherwise get a chance to talk to. Like, that's just who I am. I really, really, really enjoy that. And the more I can marry that kind of tendency to what I do well in history, or what I think I do well in history, I think you can make something good. And at the end of the day, that's all I want to do. I want to make something good. I want to make something creative and interesting that matters to people and kind of hopefully changes the way that they think about the past, maybe the present too. And from my perspective, this is the way that I can do that while being truest to myself.
I like that answer. Now, obviously, with the format and the focus you've chosen, that poses challenges, and they, you went into them well aware that those challenges would be there. Have there been any challenges that have actually taken you by surprise?
God. Yeah. Just the logistics of having to make an independent show. It's a lot of emails. I am not an email guy. I don't like emails. I don't like text messages. I tend to ignore emails and text messages when I get them. I just don't respond half the time. And then I go through and in one big blaze, I do like 1,000 emails. I don't like being interrupted. I like my focus. And it is very hard to stay focused on things when there are like 1,000 logistical details that need to be ironed out. But that's what I signed up for. Like, I never in my mind thought, you know what would be really fun? Being a digital media entrepreneur. That was never my dream here. And like, but I talked with a buddy of mine who works in TV. He's a very, very accomplished. He's won an Emmy, maybe 2 Emmys. I don't remember. But like, what he told me, he's a showrunner now. And what he told me was, you're going to reach a point in your career where to make the things that you want to make, you're going to have to do it yourself. That you are eventually going to reach the point where you're not going to be able to find the right partner. Your vision of what you want to make is going to diverge so dramatically from what other people want that you're going to have to trust yourself and go with it. And that was pretty profound to me, to just realize that, like, if you are committed to a creative vision, at some point you are going to have to create the infrastructure that allows you to make that thing. And why not now? And I heard the same thing from Spencer Hall, who does college football stuff. He's got an independent college football media operation. Delightful guy. Loves Spencer Hall. Huge Warhammer fan. One of my favorite people. One of my favorite writers. And I was talking to him and he's like, look, man, you could sell this Past Lives project. Like, I thought about pitching the New York Times and the Atlantic, and, you know, had some conversations along those lines. But like what he told me was, in 2 years, they're going to have a new editor, or they're going to have a new head of this, or they're going to have pivoted to AI or whatever. And in 2 years, you're going to be staring down exactly the same barrel of exactly the same gun you are right now, where if you want to make cool stuff and you want to make the stuff that you want to make, you're either going to have to make it yourself or give up on making those things. And like right now, I've got some runway. I've got a little bit of seed money. I've got the right relationships, the right people, the right idea. And I'm sincerely hopeful that I can make this work. I don't know what the future holds, but I feel pretty confident that we have put ourselves in position to make it work. After that, it depends on the market. It depends. I mean, if the economy crashes, then look, like, what are you going to do? Like, if people aren't spending money on things, they're not going to spend money on a subscription podcast. So, like, tough. But I feel like we have done the right stuff to put ourselves in position to be successful with it. And that's all you can do at the end of the day, is like, put yourself out there. Hope it works, man.
Yeah, exactly. No, I completely agree with that. I'm fascinated that you have so many seasons planned ahead. Mm-hmm. And you know, at least you can draw on a deep well of knowledge based on from working with tides and stuff. But the first topic is slavery, as you've talked about. Now, on one of my own shows, Pax Britannica, we've just reached the restoration of the Stuarts and all that comes with it, including the founding of the Royal African Company. And so we've reached the formal entry of the British state, as it will come to be known, into the Atlantic slave trade. Now, they've obviously been at it before that, but this is when it really picks up. Are you covering that period?
God, yeah. I'm going. I've got for that particular period. I think the person that I'm focusing on is Olaudah Equiano, where he wrote an autobiography. Like, one of my favorite sources from the 18th century is the interesting life of Olaudah Equiano. I think is the title it's often given, and it's his narrative of him of his life being enslaved, experiencing slavery, eventually kind of getting out of it and becoming an advocate for the enslaved. But yeah, no, absolutely. And not just that I'm covering that period, because it's so extraordinarily well documented and because there is such a rich historiography on it, I think it is the best period to read about to get a sense for the kind of underlying dynamics that accompany owning other people. The kinds of mindsets and mechanics that go into commodifying millions of people are not things that we can often enough see in other contexts. So we do not have, for example, an account book from a Roman or a Greek slave merchant. We don't have a detailed description for what a slave buyer was looking for after the sack of Carthage in 146 BC, when they were going through and picking out, you know, which captives are we gonna buy? What lot are we going to buy here? We don't have that. We don't know. It is lost to the mists of time. But we can go to other times and places where that information does exist, and it exists in spades for the early modern period. So if you want to understand what someone was thinking as they were walking through a slave market, there is a fantastic book on the slave market in the antebellum South that I highly recommend. It's The Ledger and the Chain. It's one of my favorite books. So there is this incredibly rich literature on slavery in that period that I think you can use really productively to read into the sources that we have for other times and places where slavery is much more poorly documented. That period is an incredible resource if you're interested in slavery generally, not just the transatlantic slave trade in that period. But I mean, obviously, it's its own thing. It's incredibly dynamic. It changes over time. That, like, the structure of the slave trade in the late 17th century is nothing like what it is in the middle of the mid-late 18th century. Even within England, the structure of the slave trade changes. Who's doing the buying changes. The way they're doing it on the African coast changes. So even there, you see development over time. Like, way too often, that period gets treated as a monolith, that you have a particular early modern way of doing slavery. And no, it's like dozens of different competing things. There are different business models that different firms use in trading along the West African coast. There are enslaved people might be treated very differently. They might be held for much different periods of time in different places, depending on where you are. The media of trade change. It's a tremendously complex series of interlocking systems. And what looking in more depth at that one did for me is help me understand how complex the slave trade must have been in the past as well. That there's absolutely no reason to think that Greek and Roman slave traders were not thinking in terms every bit as sophisticated as those of early modern people.
To drill down onto that a little bit, it's something you talk about in one of your, I think maybe the first non-introductory episode of Past Lives. It's a different way of looking at slave societies, and you know, you talk about a term, intensity. Just because I think, having listened to it, I thought that was very interesting, very, very useful, and I do plan to make use of it myself as the slave trade expands in my own narrative. Could you explain what that system is, and how do we use that? How do historians use that?
Yeah, so the concept of a slave society, right? That there is a point that you reach where the number of enslaved people and their importance to the economy, society, culture of a particular civilization reaches an extent where it defines that society. It defines that civilization. We can call those slave societies. This comes from Moses Finley, Keith Hopkins, the legacy of historians of classical antiquity in the 1970s, 1980s. But the idea is basically that you only have maybe 5 true slave societies in all of human history. That you've got ancient Greece and Rome, you've got the early modern Caribbean, you've got the American South before the Civil War, and you've got colonial Brazil. And that basically no other society meets this standard. And that's pretty clearly not correct at this point, looking at it from our perspective in the 21st century. We know so much more about the comparative history of slavery than we did 40, 50 years ago that it's just not a tenable argument to make anymore. That slavery is a spectrum of possibilities, ranging from what you might say kind of mild unfreedom to where there are restrictions on where people can go, who they can marry, kind of their control of their labor. Like, think about medieval serfdom, which is not great. Like, nobody is like, hey, you know what I want to be is a serf in a French peasant village in 1300. That's pretty terrible. Like, nobody wants that. But that's also pretty clearly not slavery in the antebellum American South. Like, there is a difference between those. And this struggle that historians of slavery have is, how do we productively compare those without doing a disservice to the actual lived experiences of the people who went through that? Because if you say, well, this isn't as bad as the other one, you're kind of implying that there are better and worse forms of slavery, which, like, honestly, I can tell you this. I've looked at a lot of them. They're all bad, man. Like, they're all, like, you don't want any of them. But how do you talk about this in terms that are not better or worse, imply that there might in some way be a good form of slavery? Well, the solution, and I really like this, is from a historian named Noah Lenski. He's a classical historian. He mostly works on late antiquity. The solution that he and his collaborator, Catherine Cameron, came up with is intensity. That there is a spectrum in all of these different aspects of slavery as a system that can range. So you might have very little oversight of enslaved people's labor and living conditions, where you might have a lot of insight. You would say that if there's a lot of control, a lot of surveillance of enslaved people, that's an extremely intense form. To what extent are enslaved people commodified? To what extent are they treated as a monetized asset? If they are treated as entirely as a monetized asset, which is what we see in the Americas, with transatlantic slavery, if they are a financial instrument for all intents and purposes, then that's an extremely intense form of slavery. Like, you can't buy and sell medieval serfs. They might come along, you might sell the land and they might come along with the land, but you're not buying and selling people. That's a difference. And the general point is that those differences really do matter to how enslaved people experienced their enslavement and experienced their lives. That those differences are important and they matter, and we need to be able to talk about them in productive ways without implying somehow that, like, it could have ever been good to be a slave, because it's not. Like, slavery is bad. It's bad for everybody involved in it. It degrades the enslavers, which is something that early modern people knew very well. If you read early modern people talking about slave ships, they know that that's bad for you. That if you work on a slave ship, you are morally degrading yourself in some profound way. Like, there's no doubt about this in the early modern world. Everybody is aware that they are in some way, shape, or form doing something bad, but they're all kind of locked in. And you need to be able to say what is happening in this place is not the same thing that's happening in this place. You need to be able to point to the cultural, economic, and social specificity of a system of slavery, while at the same time having categories for comparison. The categories I really like are extent of control that the owner has over the bodies and labor of the enslaved. The extent to which they are thought of as a monetized asset is really helpful. And then the extent of alienation from your natal society. So to what extent is your previous life as a free person over when you become a slave? And those are really, really good, easy categories of comparison that you can use across pretty much any time or place that you want. Because extent of alienation, well, okay, are we talking about people who are ripped away, transported 3,000 miles, given a new name, and surrounded by people they've never met before? That is an extremely intense version of alienation. If you're a medieval peasant, you're not really alienated from your natal society at all. You're born in your village and you're probably going to spend most of your life there. Like, those are very different systems, but we can compare them, and we should compare them because we should understand the spectrum of experiences that are at play there. The analogy that I use in that first episode of Past Lives is terminal illness. Like, if you've ever dealt with a terminal illness, you know that there are better and worse versions of that. Like, it can go, like, you know where you're going, but it can be real bad or it can be slightly less bad. And given your choice, you're going to take the one that is less bad. And, like, less bad does not mean good. It means exactly what it says. It means less bad. It is still bad, but not the worst case scenario. And I don't think it's callous when we're talking about past people's lives to point out that there are ways in which it could have been worse while still acknowledging how bad it actually was. I got into an argument with a historian of the classical world on Blue Sky about this, where her point was just like, it's always bad. And when you start to make these distinctions, you're flattening out the experiences of enslaved people. You're doing them a disservice. And I don't think that's true. I just really don't. I will listen to those arguments. I take them seriously. I listen to what they say, but I just don't think that's right. I don't think it's correct. I think that as a historian, you have to be able to compare, you have to have those categories. And if that means doing mild damage to those experiences, I think that's a worthwhile trade-off. But you need to be aware that you're making the trade-off. Like, it's not ideal, but I think you have to be able to do it in order to be an analyst, in order to have something meaningful to say about slavery as a phenomenon. And I refuse to accept that we can't say anything meaningful about, like, capital S slavery as a thing over time and space. I cannot believe that. I won't believe that.
The thing that really brings into focus for me is the comparisons that are often made in the period I'm looking at between chattel slavery and indentured servitude.
Yes.
And I think that the intensity model actually works very well for that, especially things like if you're an Irishman who's been captured by Cromwellian soldiers and shipped off to Barbados, that's not good. That is a horrible, horrible experience. and you probably have to work alongside enslaved Africans. Your experience is going to be different. It's not good, neither's good, but one is worse than the other. That is particularly one that comes up a lot in especially American debates about the legacy of slavery, which I think that's when the distinctions are valuable and need to be brought up, because otherwise then you are compressing everything into one single thing, and then I don't know, it just feels like you're missing something there without being able to make those distinctions.
You're missing something tremendously important there, and I'm so glad you brought up Barbados, because the model of enslavement, of African enslavement that develops in Barbados and is then exported from there across the rest of the Caribbean and also to South Carolina once it makes its way into the Deep South. Like, the founding generation of South Carolina planters are all the second sons of Barbados families. That's why in the state flag of South Carolina there's a crescent moon. That's the symbol for the younger sons. They were all younger sons of Barbados planters, that first generation. And institutionally, slavery in the Deep South looked different from the beginning than it looked in the Tidewater area of Virginia. The reason for that is because they were coming from different places with different ideas about what slavery was supposed to be. And like, if you can't speak in those terms about the specificity of those individual slave codes and slave systems and how those impacted the experiences of the people who lived under them, then honestly, I just don't think you're getting at what slavery actually was for those people. To say that it's all bad means that I think you're flattening out the worst aspects of those experiences for people. And you're saying that, like, people who didn't experience things that were quite as bad, that they get lumped into that same category. And I don't think that's entirely fair to anyone. I don't mean to be harsh with scholars who take this point of view, because I really do understand where they're coming from.
Oh, it's a perfectly valid point of view.
Yeah, I'm totally sensitive to it. I really, really do get it. And I thought very hard before I wrote the things that I wrote about this issue. I really gave it a lot of thought. And I came down on this side for reasons that make sense to me. I fully understand why someone might disagree, but I think for me, as a person who's ranging widely across time and space, that was an analytical model that I had to adopt, because otherwise I just wouldn't be able to work with the material that I have. I wouldn't be able to tell these stories in a way that is coherent and short enough to fit in an episode. I don't think I could do it. Like, at some point, this as a historian, I know this, you're going to have to use some shorthand. And the choice, the best that you can do is make informed choices, explain those choices, and bring your listener or your reader or whoever in on the process and just say, look, this is what I'm doing. You're welcome to disagree with me, but this is why I've made the choices I made. I think they're justifiable, and we're going to move on from here.
Well, to bring this amazing conversation to a close, you have another project at the moment, your forthcoming book, Lost Worlds. Now, that comes out in the new year, and hopefully I haven't scared you off and you'll come back on and we can talk about it in more detail.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, this was another one that it took years off my life writing this book. I'm going to be real honest with you. So when the time comes, I will talk anybody's ear off about it, just to, like, put that energy back out into the world.
So what should, as a taste of what's to come, what should people expect? Why should they put it on their pre-order lists?
I mean, I'll give you a really good reason. There is not another book like it. Not to toot my own horn too much here, but there is no other book that tells a comprehensive story of what happened to the human species between the Ice Age and the Bronze Age. If you want, I hope, an accessible, absolutely cutting edge, up to date. There are references in the footnotes from 2025. Like, I have made this book as close to the cutting edge as humanly possible. I talked to dozens of scholars who are all, again, working on the cutting edge of research, archaeological research and prehistory. It is as close as you are going to get to a state of the field of just how dramatically our portrait of that 10,000 years has changed in the past couple of decades. That when we incorporate ancient DNA, isotopic analysis, paleoenvironmental analysis, LiDAR scanning, all of the other 1,000 tools that have developed in archaeological science over the past 20, 25 years, like, our portrait of that time and place looks dramatically different. Our story of how we got from hunting and gathering to farming to cities and states to the world that looks familiar to us, that story does not look the same as it did when you read it in a textbook in high school or college. It's much, much different. The world looks different. And that if you want to get to know what that world looked like, this is the book for you. So I don't want to give myself too much credit for it, but I really can say that there is not an analog for it that is up to date. The closest thing is probably The Dawn of Everything, which is by Graeber and Wengrow, a book that I absolutely adore. I don't agree with everything in there, but I love the book. That's probably the closest analog for it. Mine's shorter, though. Take that as I'll put it this way. If you read Sapiens and thought, I wonder what this Harari guy is on about, and you wanted to read something where the author actually read the things in the footnotes, then Lost Worlds is a book for you.
Patrick Wyman, thank you so much for joining me today. If people want to give Past Lives a listen, or they want to follow you on social media, how can they find it and you?
So you can find Past Lives on any podcast platform of your choice. The Tides of History is currently available on your podcast platform of choice. It will remain available on Audible moving forward. You can find me on Instagram at Patrick_Wyman. You can find me on Blue Sky at Patrick Wyman. I am very occasionally on Twitter at Patrick_Wyman. And if you like these things that we've been talking about here, subscribe to the Past Lives Patreon. It's only $7 a month. We've got bonus content every week. There is a chat. We're doing a book club, and I'm just so excited about making this. I just hope it comes through clearly how excited I am.
I don't think there's any doubt in that. Patrick, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on. Just a pleasure chatting with you.